Hello, everyone. My name is Michael, and welcome to my Bible study series called Extraordinary Ordinary People of the Bible. Today's Bible segment is centered on the life of Moses. My mission is to get people to understand that the extraordinary people of the Bible were really simply ordinary people that were placed in extraordinary circumstances by their interactions with the Lord God Himself, Jehovah or Yahweh. And they had flaws and inconsistencies in their character, just like many people of today. For instance, Moses was a murderer. David was an adulterer, and he was also a murderer because he put his general in a situation to where he was killed to cover up his sin with Bathsheba. Peter denied Christ on 3 occasions. Paul persecuted the early Christians, hunted them down and persecuted them. Okay? Jacob, his name really meant supplanter because he was prone to trickery and tricked his brother out of his birthright. Abraham, he betrayed his wife on 2 occasions. So these people, they had common flaws that we have, but they were placed in extraordinary circumstance with their interactions with Jehovah Himself. Okay? So let's get back to the story of Moses. Well, the story of Moses really, the basis of the story of Moses really is centered on what happened before the book of Exodus. Now let's remember that Exodus really covers the life of Moses. Okay? Exodus is one of the books in the Bible that's described as part of the Pentateuch or the Torah. These are the first 5 books in the Bible, such as Genesis and Exodus and Numbers and Leviticus and Deuteronomy. These are the first 5 books of the Bible. Exodus is actually the second book in the Bible. Who was the author of Exodus? No one actually knows. Many Bible scholars are in disagreement regarding the authorship of the book of Exodus. Some people say that Moses was the author, and then other Bible scholars disagree, and they are saying that Moses couldn't possibly be the author of Exodus. But getting back to Moses, the foundational knowledge regarding Moses can best be understood by what happened in Genesis. More specifically, what happened with Jacob. Now remember, Jacob is the originator of the 12 tribes of Israel. He had 2 wives, Leah and Rachel, and he had children from 2 servant girls, and it amounted to 12 sons. And these sons became the originator of the 12 tribes of Israel. Well, our story really begins when Jacob was invited to actually reunite with his son, his long lost son, Joseph, who was lost for 22 years. Jacob, thinking that Joseph was killed by a wild beast, in which his other sons falsely informed him that he was killed by a wild beast 22 years prior. So, through extraordinary circumstances in Egypt, Joseph became the second most powerful person in Egypt next to Pharaoh himself. Pharaoh, along with Joseph, invited Jacob to move his family from Canaan, which had amounted to about 70 people, move his family from Canaan to rejoin with his son in the district in Egypt called Goshen. So as they were approaching Egypt, it was Judah that was sent out from the caravan to inquire exactly where Goshen was located. When they finally settled themselves into Egypt, Joseph made arrangements to meet with Pharaoh. So first he informed Pharaoh that his family was indeed arriving in Egypt, and then he made arrangements for 5 of his brothers and his father to meet with Pharaoh. He warned his brothers, be very careful what you tell Pharaoh, because Pharaoh's going to ask you what you do for a living. And here we have some disagreement regarding the occupation of the brothers. Not the actual occupation. We all know that they were shepherds. But there's some disagreement regarding what is reported that Joseph asked his brothers or warned his brothers to tell Pharaoh. But anyway, basically what they said to Pharaoh is, and Pharaoh did ask, what they did say to Pharaoh is they were shepherds, but they herded cattle. They handled cattle. There was nothing said to Pharaoh about sheep. And then Pharaoh responded by saying, oh, if you are experts with cattle, you can go ahead and herd my cattle. And nothing was said after that. You have to understand that in Egyptian society, the Pharaoh was regarded as like a god. Okay? Yes, there were some policy considerations with the interaction with Pharaoh between his nobility ruling class, the military, and the priesthood. But when Pharaoh opened his mouth to say something regarding what he wished, his wishes became actual decrees. And these decrees could not be changed. My point is this. When Pharaoh agreed and allowed Joseph's family to settle in Goshen, that was law. And Joseph made sure to indicate to Pharaoh that his brothers were shepherds. And so now his brothers were under the protection of the decree from Pharaoh that they were shepherds in the land of Egypt. Why is this important? Why am I even mentioning this? I'm mentioning this because the people during that time in Egypt, they were of an advanced culture. they looked upon shepherds as a lower class of people. Joseph wanted to make sure that there was no problem with them being shepherds, because if Pharaoh agreed to allow them to settle in Goshen as shepherds, no one will question that. And he also wanted to set his brothers or his family apart from the rest of the Egyptians for their own protection. Okay? So the trouble really started with the Israelites when Joseph passed away. And in time, the people began to forget all about the promises that Pharaoh made with the Israelites regarding their function there in Egyptian society. Okay? And so soon, well, I shouldn't say soon, but sometime after Joseph passed away, the Pharaoh died. And so there was a new Pharaoh that came to the throne. And he began to look upon the Israelites with suspicion because their numbers exploded. They prospered and they multiplied. People began to get fearful of the Egyptians began to get fearful of the amount of Israelites that were in the country. They were thinking that the Israelites will soon take over the Egyptians or align themselves with the enemies of Egypt and take over the country. And so in time, the Egyptians began to look upon the Israelites with a certain degree of hatred. In time, the Israelites became slaves, and their main occupation were brickmakers. They were asked or demanded to build the cities and the monuments within Egypt itself. Okay? And so the more brutal, it turns out, the more brutal that the Egyptians were treating the Israelites, the more they prospered. And that gave them even more animosity toward the Israelites. Okay? So they were under brutal rule from the Egyptians. But did God forget about his nation of Israel? No. Because one of the most important thing regarding the nation of Israel is the fact that God made a covenant with the patriarch of the Israel, the nation of Israel, which is Abram or Abraham. When way before Joseph, God made a covenant with Abraham, and he said, look, I'm going to take you up on this hill. Look up in the sky. Look at all the stars in the sky. Your descendants will become as numerous as the stars in the sky, and you will be a father of many nations. And that was his promise that he made to Abraham. And God didn't forget that promise. But you know, the Lord Jehovah himself, he does things in his own time, according to his own wisdom, at his own pace, at his own liking. And he told Abram during the time that he made his original covenant with him, he told him that your descendants will be in a strange land, and they will be freed from this land. This is basically what he said. They will be freed from this land in the period of 400 years. And they will be allowed to take their possessions with them. And the people that have oppressed my descendants, your descendants, I will deal with them in my own way. So at this point, we can always sort of draw a comparison between the Nazis and how they treated the Jewish people and the Egyptians and how they treated the Israelite nation. There is a parallel there. Okay? So, with that, I am going to leave you now with this segment. And in my second segment, in Moses, an extraordinary, ordinary man of the Bible, in my second segment, I will begin from the birth of Moses to him being exiled in the desert and the lessons that he learned in the desert that will allow him to become the leader that he will become to bring the people out of bondage in Egypt. So with that, I thank you for your time, this time. Until next time, we'll be seeing you.